Welcome to Two Lit Ladies, the podcast. The Two Lit Ladies, Dr. Katherine McKnight and Deanna Gallagher, are literacy experts and educators who specialize in developing reading, writing, and literacy skills for all students. Thank you for tuning in.
Hi, this is Katherine McKnight with
Deanna Gallagher.
And we are the Two Lit Ladies. And we're in kind of fancy surroundings here. And we're at Adventures Underground, which is the most awesomest, bestest nerd bookstore, comics, graphic novels, and everything else.
I know we're not paid to say that.
No, we're not paid. We're just grateful that somebody is letting us use their nice equipment for this podcast.
Unbelievable store. Come here, do your shopping.
Yeah, they're the number 7 store in the U.S. So we do have 2 guests, so we can get focused here on our topic. Our topic today is looking at struggling readers at the middle school, and we have 2 awesome educators, the lovely Shirley Percifield and also Jenn Marshall, and they are both reading interventionists at Highlands Middle School in Kennewick, Washington, and Deanna and I have the privilege of working in their school. I was there last year, and Deanna's come on board, and they're doing some really amazing things in their classroom, and I know that a lot of our colleagues out there have those very issues. You know, what do you do when your kids are struggling with reading skills in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade? And of course, we're very familiar with the data that keeps showing that there's a massive drop-off that happens in middle school. So we're asked all the time, I'm asked all the time, you know, what do we do? So I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. I do know, but it's better to have it from 2 amazing educators.
Absolutely.
And yeah. Okay. So what I'd like to start off is that before in previous podcasts we talked about growth mindset and literacy achievement, reading achievement, and it's basically a 3-part model. ABC. A is the affective or affective. There goes my Chicago accents of saying affective, and then the behavioral, and then the cognitive. And we have to set the stage. These are kids who have had a lot of negative experiences, troubled times within their journey to becoming proficient readers. And so by the time they're in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade and land in a class like Shirley or Jenn's, there's a lot of like tude going on, a lot of kind of heartbreak. So I'd love to hear how you gals really set the environment, the learning environment, to encourage readers and develop them from struggling readers into independent readers. And that's why I've asked them also, you know, we asked them to come on the podcast, is that they get outstanding results. They get amazing results. So I'm going to turn it over to them and some of the things that, you know, you're doing to create that setting, you know, to nurture kids.
Well, Shirley and I got to go to a conference this summer, and one of the things that kind of stuck with us really intensely was that kids that don't feel success get stressed out when the entry task is something that is curriculum that they maybe don't know the answer to. And so one of the things they encouraged was to do something fun to kind of set the mood when they come in. It's very low key, it's very low stakes, but it still kind of has that purpose. And so we sat down and we created these entry tasks. So like every Tuesday, we do a photoshopped animal, and they get to name it and like what would it eat and where do you think it would live? Is it cute? Is it creepy? And I try really hard to kind of freak them out sometimes. Like I did a bat and a raccoon, which was really cool because they were all like screaming as they come in the door.
Did you call it a raccoon or did you call it a bat cat?
I think the most common one was Bert, was his name.
Bert was his name.
Yeah.
And Bingo was his name. Okay.
Yeah. And then we just started this second quarter with a Would You Eat It Wednesday? And so I find a food from somewhere across the country. Like today it was a donut hot dog, and it was like a chocolate donut with whipped cream with the hot dog inside. Last week it was the squid ink burger from Burger King in Japan.
Wait, these are real foods?
Yes, everything's
squid
real.
Burger?
Yeah, it's got squid ink, so the entire burger is black.
Okay, I wish all of our listeners could see like Shirley's face right now. It's pretty epic.
And so
I'm still thinking about the first thing that you said.
Yeah, she's still not there. So the kids do this, and you know, one of the things I like about that you guys call it entry tasks, rather than normally we say it as a do now or bell work, and just saying those words, I'm getting a little, you know, strung out. But it's just like this entry task, and that they're also making an argument too, right? An evidence-based argument of this is what we think it is, and this is what it is, and this is what it does.
Yeah,
right?
they have to tell me what they think it'll taste like, and I don't accept things like it would be gross. They have to so the squid ink burger, they had to come up with something so squid live in the ocean, so maybe it's salty. So they think they wouldn't eat it because they think it would be too salty, or it has to be something from the picture. I don't accept gross or good or. So, what is it about the hot dog and the, whipped cream that makes everybody almost said yes?
So another kind of nerdy thing about that, well, first of all, the joke part is that I'm sure that you can't, that they can't all say it tastes like chicken. That's one of the things that they can't use all the time. But then, from a nerdy, literacy standpoint too, you're drawing on kids' background knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. So if you say squid, you're modeling that process that readers need to do to develop comprehension skills, that it's background knowledge. A lot of folks misunderstand that background knowledge is not only your experiences and what you know, but it's also your experience with literacy events or literacy experiences. And so by saying, hey, squid's in the ocean, so let's think about that environment and how that could influence how that tastes. So then you're also developing inferencing as well. So here's this fact, this fact, this fact. And by, understanding that it's in the ocean, it's salty, it's kind of squishy, how could it taste? You're actually modeling for kids' inferences.
Yes, you are. And I have to say that before I go further, there is a blue octopus that's staring at me in this, who's staring at me like he's saying, how dare they talk about eating us?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's because we're in a very content-rich environment right now. And it is also leading me to think about back in the day when we talked about encouraging synesthesia in the sense of being able to really activate the full sensory experience when we're trying to get kids to develop descriptive language. And it's well known that in the English language there are actually fewer words that describe smells and tastes, because we always say it tastes like or it smells like. Mm-hmm. And just the fact that you are engaging students in that task, it's very sneaky the way you're doing that. You are actually bringing in their sight, you are asking them to reason and visualize, but you're also enlisting all of that descriptive memory that we carry in our minds for having good smell, bad smell, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. So I find that to be incredibly clever. However, the octopus disagrees. He thinks it's unethical.
Yeah, with the googly eyes.
Yes.
But, and that's also background knowledge. Willingham's work, he is a cognitive psychologist for our listeners who don't know who he is, but he's really an important influencer on reading comprehension in our field, and he cites over and over and over again that it's background knowledge and vocabulary that really develops comprehension. And so we can teach skills like crazy, but unless we teach kids how to draw and practice using background knowledge and expanding vocabulary and expanding background knowledge, the comprehension is just not going to deepen. And of course we know too in middle school the texts get more complex. So that's awesome. So that entry task of, would you eat this, and what is this, and what other things do you do?
We do a lot of things with vocabulary, input charts. We do games. We do who has. I have who has. Mm-hmm. We do. Oh my gosh, Jenn, I just drew a blank.
Oh, that really fun dice game that the kids do, where they go in teams. And you give them a sheet, but it's really important they're practicing correctly. So instead of them guessing, the answers are on the back. Mm-hmm. And so, if Shirley and I were playing, she'd have a dice, and I'd have a pen, and I'm answering my questions as fast as I can, and I can look at the answers every time I need to. I can go back and forth. As soon as she gets a 1, she steals the pen out of my hand, and she gets to fill in her paper, and I roll until I get a 1. And watching middle schoolers accidentally knock the dice onto the floor so they can get a head start, it's hilarious. It's not a quiet day, but it is a fun day.
If you want quiet, don't do that.
Yeah, don't come in our room if you want quiet.
So Shirley, what do you notice about the kids when they participate in games? Because what I know as when I'm working in schools and working with colleagues and administrators, there's some concern about games in the classroom. And of course, Marzano's work and others really promotes games, and especially with word development. But, some of the colleagues that I work with, some of the teachers in other locations, they'll say that they've been told very specifically not to use games or word searches or crossword puzzles. So Shirley's shaking her head no.
That's such a shame.
She's giving me the teacher look, like, how could you say that? So, can you talk about that? She's giving me the blue octopus look. Yeah, the blue squid look.
Well, that's such a shame because kids, if they're having fun and learning at the same time, what an amazing thing that is. When you have kids sitting in rows and they're all quiet and they're focused on what they're doing, they're not learning as much as if they can open themselves up.
Okay, you're talking progressive smack now.
And to take the totally selfish teacher route, do you know how much faster your day goes when the kids are having fun?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Less discipline, such a better day.
I had a classic example of that today. We were working on vocabulary and the kids were just sitting there blank-faced, and it's like they just weren't getting it. I said, okay, this isn't working, guys. Let's try something different. I grabbed out the whiteboards, and I broke them up into teams, and I give each one a whiteboard and a marker, and had them choose jobs, and I put a word up on the board. I said, okay, this is what the word is. Organization was the first word. And I said, talk as a team, decide what this word is. What do you think this word means? Had them all take and then write their definition out, and then they shared it with the class. Then I gave them the definition. I said, now, as a team, write a sentence using that word in the correct way it's meant in this scenario. And it wasn't organization like organize the toys. It was organization like Red Cross, United Way, that type of organization. And it started clicking with them. And as we're having our class discussion over it, you could just see the light bulbs going off. But instead of just handing them vocabulary and trying to get them to learn it, they were having fun with it.
And it's the same activity you would have done on a piece of paper. It's the same thing you could have done on a worksheet, but because you got a whiteboard out and they're competing with each other, you're getting the exact same content in a way.
No one person has to come up with the answer.
Right.
They're doing it as a team.
Including the teacher.
Yeah.
And that is the coolest thing about that story that you just told me is what you did is public modeling of what it is to be a human being. You said, wait a minute, this isn't working. Let me try something else. I actually have the confidence to show my students that I, too, can go down a path and then turn around and come back. Now, I should say I'm looking at Shirley. How many years have you been teaching, Shirley?
This is my 18th.
Okay. And this is someone who is highly, highly experienced and has developed that Socratic sense of being able to say, I don't know, and that's what makes it possible for me to learn because I'm going to try.
Yeah, and also, Shirley, you had another career. You were like a career changer, right?
Yes,
Yeah. So you had like a whole other past life before you became a teacher.
I would go in and revamp dental offices, all their different systems, their recall, their billing, their scheduling. I'd go in and clean up a dental office that was struggling, and
Wow.
It was a lot of fun. It was a management type thing.
So you were like dental office makeover or something like that. Yeah.
Did you ever actually exact advantage upon any particular dentist?
No, I was very choosy about the dentists I worked for.
I hope so.
They, I enjoyed doing what I was doing, but I was just ready to do something different, and I'd always wanted to be a teacher, so I went back to school late in life, got my degree, and here I am.
You did not go back to school that late in life.
I graduated at 39.
Oh my gosh.
Shirley's like, she's amazing. Okay, and then Jen too. How long have you been teaching too?
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then did you have a career before that?
Not like I little bits here and there. Like
Mhm.
I've always
And then
kind
you found
of
the path.
like I did preschool and I did. I was not going to be a teacher. I hated school, like with a passion. Was never going to step foot in another school. And I don't hide that from my kids. Like they all like if you were to ask my kids what Miss Marshall do to her band teacher, they all know I chucked my drumsticks at her head when she told me that I should turn them in. They know that I've been suspended. Like I really wanted to be honest with them to the point that they understand, like, just because I screwed around in middle school and I hated school, I still got my master's degree. Yeah. I still, like, it's okay that we messed up. Like, we can change things. And So I don't hide the fact that I was suspended. I don't hide the fact that my 20-year-old kid caught her second grade classroom on fire. Like, they know, they actually love it, because like I don't hide that kind of stuff. Yeah, and I don't.
Human. It makes you one of them,
and I was one of them.
Yeah.
I was one of them.
Yeah.
But what a role model too, as we talk about the affective piece, with struggling readers, and they see that, and and you share those stories with them. I mean, of course, how they feel when they come into those classes has such an impact, right, on performance, that affective piece. And we tend to silo things, the affective, the behavioral, and the cognitive, but they really are inextricably linked.
You can't have them all. I mean, you can't have them without each other. Like, I mean, you might get compliance, but you're not going to get true learning and true unless they trust you. And these kids that I have, above everything else, they need somebody to give them a second chance, and a third chance, and a fourth chance. Yeah. I always tell them that first week of school, our goal as human beings is not to mess up the same way twice.
We learn from our mistakes, not from doing right all the time.
Right. So our goal is not to mess up the same way twice. So I will make mistakes, they will make mistakes. Our goal is not to keep doing the same mistakes.
So what would you say to a colleague, that is coming into your school? Well, actually, you do have a colleague right now who's brand new to teaching reading intervention. And what is the most salient advice that you would give them as far as creating this comfortable community where, kids are going to know that they're going to get a second, a third chance, and that, what has happened in the past and the struggles that they may have had with reading are in the past. And we start day one. Like, what advice would you give that teacher? What advice have you given your colleague, since she started with you guys at the beginning of the school year?
I think the biggest thing for anybody in teaching, I don't care if you've been doing it for 1 year or you've been doing it for 30 years.
Or if you're teaching reading intervention.
Right. The biggest thing I think teachers need to understand, they're not doing it to make you mad. They're not trying to tick you off. Like, that's not their goal. Like, they're goofing off because they're bored, or they are scared, or there's any number of reasons, but they're not, I mean, maybe there's kids out there that do it for that, but like, overwhelmingly, kids are not goofing off to make you angry.
Yeah, the behavior, a colleague of mine, Patrick Schwartz, always used to say, he's in the field of special education, he says, behavior is communication. Yeah. It's not good or bad, it's communication. So Shirley, what's your salient advice?
One of the biggest things that I kept telling our colleague this year is, you have to understand, these kids are not misbehaving because they want to be bad. They're not misbehaving, or they're not acting like the class clown because that's what they are. They're covering something up. They're covering up the fact that they struggle to learn. And so if you can get through that with them, if you can work with them and have some patience, because the Lord knows it takes a lot of patience.
Yes.
And you can finally get to that kid, you're going to be rewarded so big.
So you just have kind of defined what the heart and soul is of what you're doing. And it actually reminds me of something that we were speaking about earlier today, where you were discussing the behavior of a student, or the actual challenges of a student, where there's a possibility that that student, you weren't just heart and souling with the student, you were braining with the student and thinking, maybe something else is going on here that's cognitive that hasn't been diagnosed. When you're talking about how, particularly with language learners and non-native speakers, how hard it is because there are different things that kids do to mask and to hide. And so I thought it'd be great for you to be able to, how do you see through that with your level of experience and understanding? What kind of signs do you look for when you're like, it's not about, there's something else going on here we need to consider?
Avoidance is a huge one. When you talk to them, they just kind of give you that blank stare, like they're not understanding what you're saying. The young man you're talking about is Arabic. And, Arabic is such a literal language. And so to go from Arabic to English, which is not at all a literal language, it has lots of twists and turns to it.
Very idiomatic, yeah.
When I was testing this young man to see if he needed special education help, and the things I was watching for was his body language, his mannerisms. A lot of times you can read something to them and they'll just sit there and deflate, and you ask him what they understood in that, and he understood nothing. And so just a lot of little signs that I watch for.
Beyond just not understanding, say, the particularities of the language, but there are other kind of more serious indicators of disengagement that are maybe not intentional.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can tell if they're intentional, and you can tell if they're not. You can tell if he's actually trying to avoid the work, or if he truly doesn't understand. And it's that way with a lot of these kids that we have. You know, a lot of these kids, I've said this a million times, these kids are coming for a roof over their head, a safe place to be, food in their bellies. We're wanting them to come in and sit down and learn. They can't.
Some things are more important
Some
than
things
school.
are more important to them than school right now. And you have to watch for that with these kids, because you're not going to get anything out of them if you don't have that compassion, or you don't have that focus to look for them and be able to help them in other ways besides just academically.
Yeah.
Well, my mom, who was a Chicago public school teacher for over 35 years, you know, she used to say to me all the time that what we do as teachers is about love and social justice, and that's exactly what you're talking. I can hear my mom, you know, in the room whispering in my ear. She's like, it's always about love and social justice, right? So we kind of talked about vocabulary and background knowledge, and games,
and games.
So my mom would laugh at that one, but so we kind of took, you know, looking back on that ABC model with the affective, the behavioral, you know, what about the cognitive? You know, I'd love to hear, you know, both, you know, Shirley and Jenn have, you know, literally gains of hundreds of points in a year on Lexile levels, you know, and we talked about it this morning when we were visiting them at their school and in their professional learning community. And I always say this, that once kids crack the code, you know, even if they're in 6th grade and they're reading on a 1st or 2nd grade level, you can move mountains, you know.
It's like a Lexile Ponzi scheme.
It is a Lexile Ponzi scheme, yeah, exactly. And so let me just say too for our listeners, that's actually copyrighted by us, so nobody else can use that.
And it's good Ponzi.
Yeah, it's good Ponzi.
Ponzi instead of Ponzi.
Yeah, those of you from like the 70s remember Happy Days. But okay, back on task. But really, you know, those cognitive pieces, like how, and I'm asked this question all the time, you know, working in schools and coming in as a consultant, and Deanna as well, is just like, how do we get the scores up? It's always about the scores, and I'm like, well, let's get the skills up first, and the scores are going to follow. And so what's really some of your, what are the tricks of the trade? What do you know that you could share with our listeners? Like, how do you raise, you know, literally hundreds of points? You know, think about that student that had a massive amount of achievement, you know, 300 points, 400 points on the Lexile level. You know, what happened?
I think it's routine. I mean, honestly, like when my kids are absent, I don't make them make up every assignment, because we do Would You Read It Wednesday every single Wednesday. So if they don't get it on this Wednesday, they'll get it next Wednesday. And if they don't get it next Wednesday, they'll get it in January or in February or in May. But they'll eventually get it. And
but
so
they'll get it through those great, stimulating, different activities.
Right. So
that
we
don't seem like the same thing every time.
Right. And so we do the same thing in different ways. And so
Working on
it's
the same skill. It's the same skill, but through different.
But you sneak it.
Yeah.
And the menu items.
But to go with that, you have to make it interesting to them. You have to make it relevant to them.
And let them work together.
Yeah.
Like, letting the kids work together is huge.
Yeah, and that's something that Richard Allington cites too, you know, what leads to student growth and achievement and literacy skill development and kids talking to each other about their reading and writing. And we know that too also in mathematics, that kids who can talk about mathematics and under, you know, they can talk to their peers about it, they have a depth of understanding, right? So what else? So kids talking to each other, you know, making sure it's accountable talk and being, you know, we need to model what academic discourse looks like and how to talk about things. And the earlier vignette that you gave us, Shirley, about vocabulary and organization is a perfect example of that, right? And teaching the kids like how you talk about vocabulary, and you demonstrate that and model that. And then you're saying routines too, you know, of just, it really is those skills, you know, and the activities or the vehicles to develop those skills. What else would you share with our readers?
You have to be able to, if you see something's not working, Don't just keep plugging away.
No.
Change. If you have, like I did today, stop in the middle of the stream and change what you're doing. If you're losing the kids, they're not going to learn. You've got to be able to be flexible.
Especially with when you have your tier 3 kids, those low level readers, it's so much easier for them to give up. So when you see that glazed over eye, you can't be afraid to just back up. Okay, so this is going to take us 2 days now instead of 1. That's okay. Like we, I can't count the number of times like, okay, we're going to read this today and this tomorrow, and nope, we didn't even get through the first one today, because you have to slow down if they need it to. But then you also have to speed up. Like, you can't bore them, but you also, you've got to kind of watch it. And so it's really hard to plan very specifically, like, I'm going to do this page today and this page tomorrow, and you can't do that when you have kids that because you never know what hidden skill they didn't get.
Right.
So sometimes you have to back stuff up, and you can't be afraid to sort of have just a general plan of like, okay, I want to get through this by this week,
And that's something too, we're always under pressure for time, right? I have to cover X amount because of the test,
But like you always say, we never have enough.
No, you'll never have enough time. So everybody needs to get over that. There's a 12-step for it. So just get over it, okay? And so I was just talking to one of your colleagues today, and she was remarking that she just hasn't been able to cover as much as she did last year, same time last year. So, as we were listening, as Deanna and I were listening to her, I said, so what does the evidence show you? What does the data show you? Are your kids growing? Are they developing skills? And she said, yeah. And I said, so if they do it in 2 poems and you're not able to cover that 3rd and 4th poem, okay, that's fine. So it's really a question of, are they developing the skills? And that's a different way of thinking, because, when I started teaching 30 years ago and I taught British Lit, it was a good year if I got to Tennyson. I felt really good. And it was just coverage. But really, the paradigm has shifted, and the content is the vehicle to develop the skills. So what you're really, speaking to, Jen, is just that, of like, if it's not working, it's about the skill, not about covering 15 poems. It's about the skill. And because if you have the skill, then you can read the other 14, 15 poems, right? So
Yes.
what other advice would you ladies give?
I would say be cognizant of how long you have them doing certain tasks.
Oh, yes.
Split your day up. Don't
Chunk it.
make it. Yeah. Don't make it all about vocabulary day and reading tomorrow or writing an essay. Break it up, because these kids, they can't take it all in. They can't do that much at once. They can't stay that focused.
It's saturation, right?
Yeah, well, your short-term memory is finite. That's what the neuroscientists, or as
And
I
it's not
fondly
just-
refer to them as the neuro-nerds, tell us all the time.
And it's not just these kids, it's most kids.
It's all kids. It's
Almost all.
neurotypical kids, or kids who are, high flyers, too.
In fact, the only kids who I've seen that can absorb that kind of information are quite atypical.
Yeah.
And that's a different matter entirely.
Yeah.
But absolutely, you're right. The cup gets full.
The cup gets full, yeah. So I want to thank our guests today, Jenn Marshall and Shirley Percifield, for being here with us, because I think it's really important for colleagues to hear from other colleagues. And Deanna and I have the wonderful opportunity that here we are in beautiful Washington State in this very, very cool comic graphic novel store, and this community,
Underground,
Adventure
publicity stuff.
That's right. Yeah, there you go. And come see them. Yeah, and spend lots of money at their epic bookstore.
It won't be difficult, because let me tell you, they've got some great stuff.
Yeah, it's big nerd fun here. So it's total nerd fun. So I really want to thank our guests, very much for being part of our podcast and sharing this information. And you're always we'll have more podcasts coming up. As Deanna and I meet other interesting, great colleagues as well, along in our travels. And so we are the Two Lit Ladies. And thanks very much for joining us on our podcast.
Thanks,
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.